To many people across the globe, the year 2020 will go down in history as the year when the whole world knelt on its knees due to the coronavirus pandemic that ravaged millions of people and businesses. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected all world economies at all levels, leading to an economic recession. In the middle of this deepest recession in memory, a research shows that about 72% of businesses in Zambia are not able to raise funds for expansion due to the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight, I'm joined by stakeholders from the business community as we discuss the impact of COVID-19 on businesses in Zambia. My name is Roxy, and this is The Current Affair. All right, from the panel table, my guests tonight, Mr. Enea Piri, who is the Head of Communications, Financial Sector Deepening Limited. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
All right, and still on the panel table, Mr. Brian Ross, who is the Deputy CEO from Prospero, Zambia. Good evening.
Good evening.
Now, as Zambia Financial Sector Deepening Limited, FSD, in collaboration with BFA Global, you recently conducted a survey on the impact of COVID-19 on the small and medium-sized enterprises in Zambia. Could you share with us the highlights of your findings on how these businesses are surviving amidst the changing tides?
Thank you. So I think to start with, we have to agree that COVID has really impacted economies around the world, including our economy here in Zambia. And what we found as an organization that are working with vulnerable Zambians is the most vulnerable in society are the most impacted by COVID-19 and the slowdown in the economic process. So we've been working to find solutions to help small businesses, to help low-income households, smallholder farmers. Basically individuals in the economy that are not really in the formal financial space, and many of whom are working in the informal space. And before we begin to put together an array of interventions and innovations to address the challenges that are being faced, we have to do research to understand how they've been impacted, what difficulties they're facing, so we can begin to look at what the solution can be. So the research you've talked about, the survey that we conducted with BFA Global, was essentially looking at how has COVID-19 impacted small businesses. And you agree that the majority of businesses in Zambia are informal.
Yeah.
And many of them are very small. Many of them are not within the formal financial space. And what we found was that nearly 72% of these businesses have got challenges to accessing working capital. And this is directly as an impact of COVID-19. We also found that nearly half of these businesses are having revenue issues, so an issue to do with cash flow. And especially businesses that require direct contact with people. So think about your marketeers, think about your salons and small barbershops and places like that. So they've been heavily negatively impacted by the pandemic. What was interesting, however, is that we've seen that many of these businesses are very optimistic and are saying, this is not the end for us. We still have a chance, we can get out of this. So it was very interesting research and had very strong and fundamental results that have helped us to craft and put together interventions and innovations to look for solutions that can help these businesses. And we can talk about those a bit later.
Okay, and how are these businesses pushing through? I mean, you did say that obviously they have been having issues, but it's the pushing through that matters. So how are they pushing
Absolutely,
through?
and it's a good question. I mean, many of them are struggling. But what you find, and I think this is the beauty of Zambian ingenuity, is many of them are changing their business plans. Many of them are being more digital and are saying, how can we market our goods and services on online platforms? And you will find that this goes to as low as the most informal businesses, traders, small business owners, smallholder farmers. Many of them are saying, there is hope in going digital and in being able to meet a target market. So our research also found that when they think about marketing solutions and applications, many of them are saying we should do this more digital because COVID has really made us to think about how we can then communicate in the 21st century and how we can market our products.
Okay.
So in terms of pulling through, that's really what businesses are looking at. It's really revisiting the entire business plan and saying, how can we still manage to reach out to our target audiences and our target market, but do it safely and carefully in the new normal.
All right, Brian, you've been working with small businesses as Prospero Zambia. You operate at the intersection of market systems development and impact investment ecosystem, helping them to graduate to large firms. So what exactly has been your experience working with some of these businesses?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. Obviously, enormous challenges, as Enea has alluded to, in working with businesses to help them kind of think outside their traditional business model, think about new innovations that might have taken place, or might opportunities that have presented themselves as a result of the new normal. I think each individual or each business is an individual, and so each business that we engage with are on a different level. Each one requires a bit of a different package of support, of different technical assistance, of a different advice, etc. So each one, it's difficult to kind of generalize, but I would echo what we're hearing from Enea's report is that entrepreneurs are often eternally optimistic, and you have to be, right?
Absolutely.
to be a successful entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
And so I think that the successful ones that we're seeing are able to make those adaptations and make those changes in their business model are the ones who are having the mindset of, what's the next step that I need to take, and not sitting back and waiting, or putting kind of undue stress on themselves. I think there's enough stress to go around from COVID, right? The ones who are really innovating are the ones who are thinking for the future and thinking how can we come through this period to be more competitive and a more effective business.
Okay, how are you helping the ones that might be lagging behind in terms of innovation? Because you will agree with me that Zambia, I think, in terms of digital platforms and whatnot, I think this is the time that we're actually adapting and learning and getting to that place where it's like, okay, I can actually use the internet for my business. So how are you helping those that might be lagging behind? Because you could have an older woman who has a business and she's selling things, but she's not quite savvy in terms of technology. Sure. So how do you help those kinds of businesses?
Often where we come in is this market development space, where we are interested in working with businesses and platforms who can then, as a result of that, reach out to a much wider number of individual businesses. We often don't work directly with each individual small business. We'll work with someone who's kind of providing a platform service that a lot of the businesses can engage, can sell their products through, can market through. So in that sense, we try to work with businesses who can reach, on some level of scale, a wider number of businesses that open up opportunities for a larger number of small SMEs to be able to sell their goods and services or market or otherwise reach a larger market than they otherwise would kind of as individuals.
All right. As FSD, Enea, how are you helping in ensuring that companies remain afloat amidst COVID-19?
So for us, the starting point is to conduct the research so we can understand the challenges and difficulties that small businesses are facing. And as you've mentioned, we have that survey that we conducted, and it's pointed out a couple of things: cash flow issues, access to working capital has reduced, and this is really affecting businesses to stay afloat. So what we've done then is, based on these results, is design and develop pilots that look at business resilience and business resurgence during the pandemic and also in the post-pandemic recovery period. An example of this would be the work that we're doing in partnership with ZDA, and also the Zambia Federation of Associations for Women in Business, ZAFWID. And effectively what we've done is we approach the Zambia Development Agency and say to them, you have a database of tailors, because we know that masks are going to be part of the new normal going forward, and they're going to be required to be in supply. And we say to them, you have a database of tailors, can you come up with 500 tailors of men and women? And we also went to ZAFWID and say to them, you work with women in business, and many of these are tailors. Can you come up with 500 as well? And the idea then is that these 1,000 tailors, half of whom are women, and also this is part of our motto in terms of working with women and empowering women, especially during this time. And we know that women have also been hard hit by the pandemic. The idea then is to have 1,000 tailors who are going to put together 60,000 masks, right? And our intervention doesn't stop there. We've then engaged the Zambia Association of Manufacturers to find a market for these masks, so that once these masks are made, they're tailored, then there's a ready market to sell them to. So, companies that will require masks. And by the way, these are internationally approved masks that are approved to protect us from the pandemic or from transmitting or indeed contracting the pandemic. So we as FSD Zambia are providing resources for the materials for these masks. We are also providing resources for mentorship through consultants who are going to help to ensure that the masks that are produced are the ones of the highest standards and quality that are accepted, right? So already we're looking at 1,000 tailors who are empowered, and we have a ready market through this partnership with Zambia Manufacturing Association of Manufacturers. Now, all our projects require sustainability. So it's not just a once-off, create 60,000 masks and sell them off and it's done there. What we're going to do is have half of the proceeds for the mask go back to the tailors as payment, in-kind payment for the support and for the work that they'll be doing because they have to earn a living. And the other half will go into a revolving fund. And what will happen going forward is that members of this association who are going to be part of this revolving fund can then come to the fund and say, hey, I have an order to do uniforms, or I have an order to do more masks. And can I access from this fund for my capital? So then we create a capital cycle. So they get that capital, they produce, they sell, they pay back with a little bit of interest so that that fund can continue to grow. And the idea then is to have business resilience during these very difficult times. Mind you, this is just a pilot. And dependent on how, and we're very optimistic, much like the entrepreneurs, we're very optimistic that this will work. Yeah. And when it does, then we can scale up to other industries. We can say, who's doing sanitizers, who's doing PPEs, and our target will be very small businesses. So that's part of the work that we do, and it's very informed because we look at what really is happening from a research perspective, and then we design these products, and hopefully then they can grow into programs, and we can help many Zambians.
Okay. All right, Brian, I know Prospero Zambia, in terms of ensuring that companies remain afloat, that you have funded a couple of organizations or companies or businesses. Could you tell us a bit of that? The criteria in picking some of those businesses and how they're faring as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Prospero, when the pandemic hit in kind of the March, April timeframe, we had been in the midst of kind of our strategic planning for our, a normal year.
Which we always.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like we really had to shift gears quickly, and we released several kind of grant-funded support facilities that was targeted at in this pandemic time. So the first one was similar to what FSDZ did. We had a small business resilience facility, and that was really targeted at companies who needed some wage bill and basic operations support. And the goal of that was just to keep primarily tourism companies, keep them just basic operations, making sure that their employees could get basic pay, and just kind of extend that as long as possible. The other facility that we put together was called a post-COVID recovery. So this is where we offered co-financing opportunities to businesses who were already thinking post-COVID and looking at opportunities and looking at how they could use this COVID kind of downtime to improve their business operations, to improve efficiencies, to shift their business planning. So in a post-COVID world, they could emerge in a more competitive position. And so those were two of the main facilities that we released during COVID. And most of those, are well underway at the moment. The businesses are receiving the support, and we're getting very good feedback in terms of the effectiveness of those facilities. In supporting the businesses to maintain and grow. And I mean, we're seeing in many areas of the economy some more activity, right? I mean, it's opening. Yeah. People are becoming a bit more confident in how to operate their businesses responsibly and safely for themselves and their employees and the wider market. And so we're fortunate now to be shifting in some ways out of the COVID kind of short-term emergency response into more of a long-term strategy at the moment.
Okay. I know that one of the businesses that you helped is Discover Zambia, and I bring this up because tourism was one of the sectors that was very hard hit. Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about that, what it was like working with a business like Discover Zambia who deals in tourism, especially that we had a shutdown?
Sure.
People not coming into the country and all that.
Yeah, no, I mean, tourism was enormously impacted and remains so. slowly, there's a few international tourists coming back, and there's also some interesting and positive developments in the domestic tourism industry. But for a company like Discover Zambia, we've engaged them on to support growth of digital marketing of tourism, which I think is something that really has a lot of potential in Zambia. I think it's been underexploited. And so we saw Discover Zambia as an emerging, strong business with a good model and good technical capacity to be able to really perform some high quality, interesting digital marketing, really put out some good content that will have a longer term impact. Their products now are getting noticed by international firms, and as tourism comes back, as the airline industry figures out how to readjust, as the tour operators overseas have more confidence in Zambia as a safe destination to send clients to. All of that interacts with the content that Discover Zambia is putting out now to bring more tourists back, in hopefully in the very near future, but I think in the medium and longer term, for sure.
Okay, I know beyond Discover Zambia that you work around tourism as well. So what kind of advice would you give to other businesses that are dealing in tourism at the moment, especially with COVID-19?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that we've really seen is a bit of a resurgence of tour operators and lodges and accommodation providers in Zambia turn more to the domestic market, which has been, I think, a really positive and interesting experiment for some of them. Yeah. I think a large section of the Zambian tourism industry is focused on the international market. Yeah. And obviously, in order to kind of cover costs and make sure that their employees can stay employed, a number of them have done more marketing around their Zambian resident rates, which I think has been positive. And I think it ultimately will result in a stronger local tourism market. And we're also working with some entrepreneurs who are now focused on that domestic tourism market as well. So supporting them in developing models and developing businesses and developing kind of more innovative activities and diversifying the product base to appeal to a more domestic Zambian crowd, which is really exciting and an interesting part of our work as well.
Okay. All right, let's take a break and we will be right back. All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, I am talking to Anea Piri, who is the head of communications, FSD, that is the financial sector deepening, and Mr. Brian Ross, who is the deputy CEO from Prospero, Zambia. Now, FSD, obviously your research covered the aspect of assessing the digital readiness of the firms as a method to limiting the impact of COVID-19. How ready are these firms ready to adapt to the new normal?
I would tell you, so there's two aspects you can look at it from. It's how ready are they currently, and there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. But in the same spirit of optimism, they have many businesses, as high as upwards of 70% that we were talking to, were saying we need to go digital to market our products and services. So there is an appetite, there is an enthusiasm to go digital, and given the current situation and the situation as it will be for the foreseeable future, we're very much looking at businesses now and saying to them, you need to be going digital. We have a pilot project that we're actually right now working on in 4 provinces, including Luapula, Northwestern, Western Province, and others, where we're looking at distributing cell phones to low-income households and particularly vulnerable communities, looking particularly at women. And you might ask why. We know that there has been major changes in the cellular network capacities around the country. Zicta has released numbers recently that showed that there is a huge number of coverage around the country. Infrastructure has been put in place, but access to cell phones still remains an issue. And we as FSD Zambia, we're looking at how can we empower vulnerable communities with cell phones for information on COVID, on agriculture and other things, but also for digital financial services, so as a means to an end. And we're currently distributing around 44,000 cell phones. to vulnerable, specifically chosen communities and persons in those communities, to make them come on board the infrastructure of digital engagement.
How are you helping in terms of literature, teaching them how to actually work on or work with these cell phones?
That's a good point.
It would be it's okay to distribute
Absolutely.
and give them, but
Yeah.
if they don't know how to actually use these phones, then what happens?
You're actually very right. That's part of our onboarding process. Okay, we are getting very simple feature phones, right? And you will find actually, and from our work and research that's been done by Zikta and others, that cell phone penetration is actually becoming more and more. The penetration is much more even in rural communities. Almost everybody's got a cell phone, and they know how to use its basic functions. They know how to make a call. And now what we're saying to them is, how can you transact using your cell phone? How can it make your life easier? How can it input you into that space where you have digital financial services at your fingertips? So the onboarding process for us is very important. How do you manage to use the cell phones? But more importantly, how can you use the cell phones for information that can protect yourself and your family? And beyond that, how can you then use the cell phones for digital financial services that has the most positive impact on your life? So we're targeting at distributing 44,000 cell phones and teaching the target audiences on how to use the cell phones, but most importantly, how to use them for what we hope will have a positive impact on their lives. This is just part of what we're doing to include vulnerable communities, particularly on digital financial services. And we hope this will have a ripple effect on small informal businesses that are now looking more to go digital, whether it's in transactions, because we know that COVID, for example, survives on surfaces, and if we can limit cash transactions and switch over to digital transactions such as mobile money and others, then we're really looking at including that larger space.
And also, I'm sorry to cut you off, but how easy is it or difficult is it to convince maybe, let's say, a farmer out there to move his business to digital, to say, instead of you having your money in your hands, it will come through your phone? How easy or difficult is it to be able to do that?
I'll tell you, it's a surprisingly efficient process when you incentivize it, in the sense that if you tell your farmer, for example, that the only way they're going to be able to receive farming inputs or a code through farming is through their cell phone, then they're sort of encouraged, I was going to say forced, but I won't, they're sort of encouraged to go onto the platform and say, this is an easier way to access benefits for me. So the conversation that we have is, we say to them, there is a far more efficient process. You do not have to walk long distances to go and access, it could be resources that have come to you. You can receive your resources on your cell phone. You can buy things using your phone, and it cuts down on that process. I'll give you an example, if I may. There is a group of savings groups, and we work very closely with informal finance people who are doing savings groups. There's a large group of women who are in savings groups in northern Zambia that we work with directly. And they save on average 5 kwacha every sitting, and they sit maybe once or twice a week, much less now because of COVID. And imagine this, so they are saving 5 kwacha per session, this is per person, and they save enough to pay school fees. But in order for them to go and pay school fees, they have to walk and travel and spend a lot of money to get to the point where they actually pay their school fees. What we've done is say to them, let's digitize that process. And we've partnered with MTN Mobile Money and said, don't charge these groups to pay the school fees off their phones. And we cut out that process. It's a huge saving on their part. It gives them more to do with their resources, and at the same time, they're able to send their kids to school.
Okay. All right, governments around the world have pledged billions of dollars for COVID-19 vaccine and treatment options. A number of pharmaceutical firms are in a race to develop and test potential drugs that could help nations get back to, I guess, what we would perceive as normal. Since hopes may not be enough, while the search is going on, what role should businesses play to sustain their operations and ensure their survival, Brian?
I would look at it a few different ways. I mean, one is just responsible business. I think, businesses should be aware of the interactions that occur, kind of the human interactions that occur throughout their business activity, and do what they can to protect their employees, to protect their customers. And there are lots of good resources. Another thing we worked on is kind of some suggested standard operating procedures for businesses in a wide variety of sectors. And there's a lot of resources like that available online, samples through our website, where businesses can just know what they need to do to operate responsibly. On the other side, from a financial and a kind of an economic standpoint, I think COVID has taught us all lessons of, or reminded us about disruptions that can happen. whether it's on a global scale like a pandemic, or whether it's on a logistics aspect, small to large business disruptions happen, and businesses should take as much opportunity to plan, to think about, to minimize the risk of those business disruptions from impacting their cash flows, or their ability to reach their customers, or their ability to get inputs, or whatever the case might be. But I think that's a really important aspect that we're encouraging all of our kind of partners to go through, as and we have resources available to help businesses think about those things, and to think about how they can shift their models and be more, operate more responsibly in that way.
Okay, I know that before COVID hit, I think you both know as well that already our economy wasn't doing that well, and so businesses were already having difficulty in being able to sustain themselves. Do you think that COVID could be the last stone in already struggling businesses?
Business is business, in any economy. It's difficult, right? Obviously, some businesses will go out of business. I mean, most businesses ultimately go out of business, right? I mean, it's especially startups. Yeah. So of course, the added pressures that COVID brings has done and will certainly cause some businesses to go out of business or to fail. Of course, I think my personal sense is any government across the world knew this was really coming, and the impact that it would have had. I think some governments have responded better than others. I think some governments have made choices that have increased or extended the challenges. I mean, fortunately in Zambia, compared to many other countries, the impact of COVID has been much less on a health standard and a health perspective. And my personal view is that the government here has handled it quite well, to be honest. With the resources that it has and the decisions that have to be made, I'm fortunate that I don't have to make those types of decisions. It's not an easy position to be in. But I think by and large, the government here has really done an admirable job of managing the overall situation that no one really predicted.
Yeah, and if I can chime in, and just to agree with Brian as well, I think this is an opportunity, and we believe as Eversty Zambia that this is a chance for businesses now to evolve and to think about how they can approach the new normal, and think about what sort of products and services that they can begin to provide, which can help them to thrive, especially small businesses, especially informal businesses. And I gave an example, for instance, of the masks that the masks project that we're doing, the business resilient facility that's targeting at producing masks. That's a new product now that the market will need and will need going forward. And it's time for businesses to become more innovative, to look, to evolve and to think more, what can they provide in terms of products and services in the quote-unquote new normal.
All right, I guess we're going to take a break, and we will be right back. All right, welcome back. This is still the current affair that you're currently watching on Mwerantu TV. As the challenges associated with the coronavirus pandemic mount, I believe there are opportunities amidst the crisis. So what opportunities does the pandemic present to the business community, if any?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think in every challenging or difficult situation, we should always look at what opportunities or positivity we can take out of it. And particularly for businesses, like I say, this is really a chance for them to rethink their business models and think about how then they can begin to penetrate these new markets that are going to come up. as a result of the pandemic. So it's really thinking about how can they restructure their resources, how can they restructure their products and services to meet the needs. Because the pandemic has brought about a new set of unique needs that we didn't have before and that the market didn't foresee before, just like Brian said. So this is really an opportunity for businesses to think about what can they begin to provide that is necessary right now. At the risk of being blindly optimistic, I don't feel personally, and as FSD Zambia, we believe that there is an opportunity now for businesses to come out of the pandemic and begin to thrive, or to be resilient during these very difficult times. And of course, working with partners like Prospero, who are providing sort of that almost direct support, if you like, to sort of the way business is structured. So yeah, I think there is many opportunities to think about what products and services were not there before that the pandemic has made necessary, and how can small businesses begin to think about providing those to survive.
The Zambian government, through the central bank, had available 10 billion kwacha package to help cushion against economic slump, particularly for small businesses, since it has become challenging for most businesses to keep their financial wheels turning due to less revenue churn and the general uncertainty in the global financial environment. How can companies take advantage of this facility?
Yeah, and just to start with, and like Brian had mentioned, the government's been working tirelessly to see how they can support businesses, especially during these very difficult times. And we know that by and large, many of whom have been able to access this relief package are big banks and established micro financial institutions. So that helps them as well to keep their wheels turning. What we have done as FSD Zambia is really to look at informal sectors and try and see how we can bridge that gap for them to access resources from banks, because individually they're unable to access loans or indeed relief facilities because probably they lack the KYC, they lack surety, they lack cash flow projections, they don't have audited accounts of finance and things like that. We have a project that we've been piloting in Choma, for instance, where what we have done is we're looking at small business owners, so traders who are operating in small villages around Choma. And effectively what we came to see through research and observation was that many of the small traders, many of the small businesses didn't have capital to grow their businesses, right? They have a small shop, maybe they sell detergent, maybe they sell small goods and things like that, and that shop services several villages. And they can't grow that business because they don't have the capital to do it. What we did is we went to the wholesalers who supply these shops and say to them, give us a list of traders that you're working with. And then we got that list and say to them, can you identify yourselves in a group and come up and create a savings group? And because we've got a relationship with Investrust Bank, we then opened a savings account, right, for particular groups. So it could be small groups of 20 small traders. And we've said then to them that they can be saving within themselves the way a normal savings group would work. Yeah. And when they put money in that pot, that money goes to the bank. Now here's the catch, and this is where sort of we try to look at sustainability. When they want to borrow, they don't go and borrow cash. They borrow stock from the wholesaler, and the bank then transfers those resources to the wholesaler, right? And they get stock, and they're able to replenish their stores and grow their stores because they're able to
get out of the KYC of loans and terms and conditions and whatnot.
Exactly. Okay. So then they're able to access that facility through that sort of relationship. And we know that because the bank has been able to access sort of the relief package, the banks are also able during this particular time to have resources to keep moving. So we're trying to see how we can complement government's efforts. We've been working very hard during very difficult times to keep business alive.
Okay.
I'll just add, one of the things that Prospero is focused on is kind of increasing access to impact investment finance. So, and what that means is basically it's working with investors who are interested in a financial return, but they will often accept less return in exchange for social benefits like job creation, like environmental improvement, these types of things. And so that's one area that Prospero is really working hard to also complement this whole access to finance issue that really is a challenge across Zambia and across the breadth of businesses that both FSDZ works with and Prospero works with. So we're eager, and we're doing a lot of work in that space. I think we've facilitated something like 80 million pounds of impact investment over the last couple of years, and really looking to try to scale that up in coming years.
All right. Since the impact on startup or small businesses can be way more brutal, as they have scarcer cash reserves and smaller margin for managing sudden slumps, as you have rightly explained. As we come to the end of the program, what kind of advice can you give the business community as well as policymakers?
Ooh, good question. Listen, I think incentivizing and growing and having a very strong business enabling environment really is important for Zambia to continue to grow its private sector, to continue to create opportunities for the thousands and thousands and thousands of school leavers that come onto the job market every year. You know, an enormous portion of those students will need to move into an entrepreneurial space. And so I think, you know, continuing to facilitate entrepreneurial thinking, opening, you know, working to open new markets, working to really push an environment that produces strong tech-savvy entrepreneurs is really an important, you know, area that really we all should be contributing to in moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay, Anea, before you answer that particular question, I wanted to find out how can we get companies to become formal? Because one of the issues that keeps them from gaining capital mostly is the fact that they haven't formalized their businesses. You can find that someone has this big wholesale shop in the compounds.
Yeah.
They're making good money,
Yeah.
but they don't have books. They don't have an account, and so when things like COVID hit,
Yeah.
they're unable to access capital from banks because they haven't formalized their businesses.
That's very true.
So how can we get more Zambian entrepreneurs to formalize their businesses?
And I'll tell you, I'll really echo what Brian has said. It's looking at the environment. Is there an enabling environment that allows formal businesses to thrive? We work a lot on building capacity of businesses, big and small. And we're saying to them that if you have access to formal financial services, you can resist some of the shocks, so you can be better prepared for some of the shocks that exist, be it a pandemic or indeed any other type of shocks. A big part of the work that we do is inclusive insurance and saying, can businesses begin to insure themselves from unforeseen events? And this really is access as well to some form of financial inclusion that protects businesses and eventually protects families and communities. So to a large extent, it's really looking at engaging policymakers and ensuring there is, in fact, an enabling environment that allows businesses to thrive. But at the same time, it's building capacity and changing mindsets of businesses and saying to them, you can build something from very little. And I'll tell you, working firsthand with small businesses and low-income households, that there is a lot that can happen with very little resources. And this can build, and as we connect various like-minded individuals who seemingly don't have enough or who seemingly don't have enough to even start a business. There is a lot that can happen once you bring them collectively, you provide them the skills, the knowledge, and the understanding to build businesses, basic financial knowledge to understand and to build businesses that can then help them to leapfrog from the informal to the formal sector and better protect themselves and their family.
All right, thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so those were our guests for tonight on The Current Affair. Remember, we do this every single Thursday right here on Mwebantu at 19:30. So make sure that you do join us and remember to like and share.